Today is the start of the Frankfurt Motor Show, and while I would love to be there covering all the latest new cars to hit the market, I'm actually on a road trip to Los Angeles in my Chevrolet Bolt EV for an award ceremony to mark the start of Drive Electric Week. I'm going to be doing my best to cover as much of the Frankfurt show as possible from the road, as well as come off my road trip, watch the second channel. But today I figured it would be a really good time to pre-record a slightly different video detailing some of the plug-in cars we've collectively owned over the years. And by we, I mean myself and my wife Kate. Let's call her Americate because there are two Kates in this company, as well as those owned by Kate Walton Elliott. Let's call her Pure Kate, and her partner. Over the last couple of months, we've noticed a lot of interest from people in the comments section on this channel, asking just what cars we've collectively owned, and so we all figured it was time to share. For the sake of brevity, I'm going to focus mainly on plug-in cars and pretty much ignore all the plug-in bicycles and plug-in scooters that we've collectively owned. And before I do, I should note here that Pure Kate and I became friends through the world of classic cars, specifically Morris Minors. So it goes as read that we've owned a selection of classic petrol cars in our time. Pure Kate more so than me. But I should also throw a bone to the 3 hybrids my partner and I have owned, and the 2 hybrids Pure Kate and her partner have owned between us. That amounts to 4 second-generation Toyota Prii, 1 I actually converted to a plug-in hybrid, more on that later, and 1 first-generation Honda Insight. Okay, enough of the engines. Let's go back to the start, and I'm going to try and keep this as brief as I possibly can, although it is going to be longer than usual for reasons that I think will become quickly apparent. My first plug-in car was a tiny limited-speed thing called a City L. It was built in Germany by a company called Citycom. Its design was originally penned in the 1980s by a Danish company called L-Trans, who originally sold a vehicle with the same design called the Mini L. It was slow and used 36 volts of heavy lead-acid batteries and a 4 kilowatt electric motor, which topped out at a heady 63 kilometers per hour. But back in 2007, when I purchased it, originally as a stopgap while I tried to convert my Morris Minor to electric, it was my first all-electric ride. The Minor didn't get converted, and I eventually converted the City L's battery pack to lithium-ion, dramatically decreasing the vehicle's weight and increasing its top speed. And let me tell you, when you've gone 100 kilometers per hour in a lightweight bubble and you're hit by a crosswind, it's not fun. I sold the City L, nicknamed the Flying Banana, because I wanted something highway capable and less likely to tip over. Yeah, I did tip it once. And so I instead focused on a plug-in Prius. The car I converted in 2009 was a 2004 Prius, and I drove it for several months without nary a problem, managing over 1,000 miles on a tank of fuel. Sadly, it died rather unceremoniously the night before the Tesla Store UK opening. It was killed after a battery short circuit caused a thermal runaway, and I hadn't bothered to use thermal protections. In fact, it actually died the night before Robert Llewellyn's second-generation Prius met its fate when another car hit him late at night. But that's his story to tell, not mine. After the plug-in Prius came a few electric scooters, as well as the Volkswagen Golf City Strummer. Built by Volkswagen in 1985 as an electric car, several hundred left-hand drive variants were made, but only 3 right-hand drive examples were. They were never meant to enter into private ownership, but one did. And because of my job covering electric vehicles, I was offered one. Initially, I couldn't buy it. I still owned the Prius, but a friend purchased it, and eventually I purchased it from him. And in 2010, it was actually my wedding car. Shortly after, I also heard of a G-Whiz. Yes, one of those being offered for free. Hey, free. I had to drive to London to pick it up. So I did. Although it was offered as a non-runner, a few days at home with a laptop and some software got it running, and I used it as a runabout when the Golf was low on charged. Unbeknownst to me, the little G-Whiz was actually one of the first pre-production models in the UK. It was badged as a Reaver rather than a G-Whiz, and it had a really cute license plate. At this point, about 2010, Pure Kate decided to get into electric cars. She'd been seeing the fun that my wife and I were having driving electric, slight irony there because early days were anything but fun, and decided to get an electric car for her mother. And so, with some help from yours truly, we found an original Enfield electric car for sale in a classic car magazine. It was in Wales and we drove to pick it up, and after a little TLC and some new batteries, it passed its MOT, that's a UK roadworthiness test, and headed to its new home with Pure Kate's mother. And then, literally a few days after becoming road legal, there was a massive storm and a massive flood in which the Enfield was killed and any hope she might have of using it went with it. Pure Kate saw sense to buy it back from the insurance company and she did plan to restore it. In the interim, I sold the Gee Whiz to Pure Kate's mother and it promptly decided to never work properly again. Sorry, mate. In 2011, my partner and I adopted, and so we entered a very brief hiatus in plug-in cars. The city Strummer blew its motor and I didn't have the time or money to fix it, so we ended up with a classic Volvo 240 for a short time as a daily driver, with a Smart for 2 as Americate's commuter vehicle. But luckily, a chance encounter in late 2010 played to our advantage when a UK press officer for Volkswagen found out that we owned a city Strummer. He remembered them from the 1980s and had been looking for one for the Volkswagen press fleet, one of the lost vehicles. Even though the car was broken, we agreed to sell it back to Volkswagen for the same small price we paid for it, and the car then went off to be restored, and is still being restored. I know people will be angry that this car went back to Volkswagen and that we sold it to them, but honestly, I'd rather it survived as a heritage fleet vehicle with Volkswagen than end up in a scrapyard because I couldn't fix it, so yeah. Selling the Volkswagen allowed us to put a little money down on a Nissan Leaf, and so in 2011, Niro entered our life. He was the first brand new all-electric model we'd owned and frankly was a great first experience of a brand new EV. We drove him a total of 80,000 plus miles between April 2011 and August 2015 when we sold him in order to move the entire Gordon Bloomfield family to the US. With me driving electric, my wife, Americate, wanted in on the action too. She ended up with a second-generation Prius for a short while, but after I sold my motorcycle and ended up with 2 Renault Twizzys in quick succession, we had an accident in the first one. We agreed to sell the Prius and the Twizy to get her a plug-in too, a UK spec Chevrolet Volt. Yes, I know what you're thinking, they don't exist, blah, 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 except they did. While the majority of the UK and European spec Volts were actually rebadged and sold as Opel or Vauxhall Amperas, a couple hundred UK spec Chevy Volts did make it to the UK. They were a couple of £1,000s cheaper than the Ampera, and so we liked them, and we purchased one. I should note at this point that Johnny Smith also has a real Chevy Volt too. I laughed when I found that out because he's coming back in this story too. Like the Leaf, we actually kept the Volt. We purchased it in 2013 until we emigrated to the US in 2015. At this point, I can't remember exactly when, Johnny Smith noted that he was on the lookout for an Enfield electric to turn into a super fast EV. And since I knew of one sitting in the garage needing some love, Pure Kate hadn't been able to start its restoration, I put the two in touch. And so the Enfield got a new lease of life as the flux capacitor. Small world, eh? It's about this point that Pure Kate and her partner decided to buy an electric car of their own, and they ended up finding a Japanese spec pre-production Mitsubishi Imea for sale in the north of England. It had been imported to the UK as part of the Cabled programme that Robert Llewellyn and several of my other friends had been part of, and had some particular quirks that needed to be tamed, such as not having the now required charging station control circuitry in order to use public charging stations. But it did its job, drove back to the southwest of England and had the modifications needed, and kept the Bolton Elliott family happy until they moved to the US 4 months after the Gordon Bloomfields did. And there ends the UK part of our EV owning experiences. And over to the US, where we pick it up. When the Gordon Bloomfields arrived in the US in August 2015, we purchased a 2013 Nissan Leaf. It's still my wife's daily driver, and I did an update video on it recently. I didn't actually have a car for almost a year because I worked primarily from home, but in 2016, after asking around for one, a RAV4 EV came into my life. And I mean the original generation one, not the second generation one. It was stone cold dead and donated to us so that we could try and see what it was like living with an older EV. It received an expensive battery upgrade with old battery cells and didn't do too badly for a year, but couldn't be charged away from home because it had an older charging standard that didn't exist in the wild anymore. Seeing what fun I was having with my RAV4 EV, my buddy Pure Kate decided to buy one for herself and ended up with her own first-generation RAV4 EV. It was far more reliable than mine and only recently left the Walton Elliott family. To complement the RAV4 EV, they also decided to buy a used BMW i3 Rex, which, if you followed this channel for a while, you'll know is particularly bothersome and not all that reliable. Back to my family, and we'd reached the point where our RAV4 wasn't behaving. The 15-year-old batteries weren't happy, and while there was someone willing to work on it locally, the wait times to get them to work on it would have required us to find another vehicle. Sadly, since we only had space for 2 cars, it had to go, and I ended up changing to a 2017 Chevrolet Bolt EV. Luckily for me, it was heavily discounted, as some crazy person had crashed it, taking it off the transporter when it first arrived at the dealership. It had been repaired before being sold, but still was significantly reduced. The final switch, well, that came a few months ago when Pure Kate and her partner sold their RAV4 to a gentleman on the East Coast and replaced it with a Kia e-Niro. But the details for that one, I think, are probably best spared for another video. So that's it. That's the collective fleet that we've owned in 12 years of plug-in ownership between the entire Transport Evolved team. And if you're wondering, neither Erin nor anyone else on the team have a plug-in car yet, but we're working on them. That's it. Thanks for watching, and if you'd like to help us make more videos like this, please do consider commenting and subscribing. Send us a couple of dollars away every month through Patreon, buy us a coffee using Ko-fi, or visit our swag store and buy some merch. I'll be back soon with more content for you all to enjoy, but until then, behave yourselves, keep evolving.